Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully you all are having a wonderful day today. So I'm going to basically kind of give you my predictions about the fights next week. I believe next week, next Saturday on July 11th, it is going to be UFC 251. And this fight is going to be between Kamaru Usman and Gilbert Burns. Kamaru Usman, of course, a lot of people know him. He is the most recent welterweight champion. He just defended his title not too long ago against Colby Covington. Not a overly liked fighter in the UFC, but anyway, Gilbert Burns is a new up-and-comer. He has been on a very great tear in the UFC welterweight division right now. I believe he moved up not that long ago. So Gilbert Burns recently has defeated Damian Maia, which is very impressive because although Damian Maia is older, Damian Maia, he had not been knocked out or stopped ever since his fight with Nate Marquardt. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. And that's very impressive because that was like 10 plus years ago. So Damian Maia is extremely hard to stop. And I thought that he just hit Damian Maia with a very good punch. I thought maybe that's why he stopped him. Come to find out, in his next fight against Tyron Woodley, Gilbert Burns just has phenomenal power. So this fight is going to be very interesting. This is the main card. This is the main event of the evening. And guys, it's going to be a barn burner. I can't wait to watch this. But we're going to go through the whole entire main card. I'm going to tell you the 5 fights overall. And I'm going to go through the 5 main fights, and I'm going to tell you who I think is going to win each of these fights and why. So these are my predictions, and let's get into it. So the first one is a women's flyweight bout. You have Amanda Ribas versus Paige VanZant. I believe that's how you pronounce that first lady's name. I believe she's Brazilian, and I think that's how they pronounce it, but correct me if I'm wrong. But anyway, when it comes down to it, I just watched Amanda Ribas's most recent fight, I believe, against Mackenzie Dern. That may not be her most recent fight, but it's the one where, you know, she has the most notable fighter there. I know of Mackenzie Dern. She's a very decent fighter. I just recently watched the fight, and she pretty much outfought Mackenzie on the ground and with the striking. I remember that fight now that I watched it. And she's a very tricky striker. She looks like she has some tricks on the ground as well. Although I'm not necessarily sure if she'll stop Paige on the ground. What I'm going to predict is this. I think Paige VanZant, you know, whenever I've seen her, and to be honest with you, I did not even still know she was with the UFC promotion. I thought that actually she had left, but either she returned or something else. Either way, whatever. But neither here nor there. Bottom line is this. I have not been impressed with Paige. And maybe she's been working on more things since I've not seen her. I don't know. But if I had to guess, Paige probably is not going to be all that much more improved. Amanda just seems like a very decent striker. She seems like a very decent contender. I don't know if Paige really has anything overall to stop this girl. And in my opinion, I don't think Paige is going to be able to outstrike this girl. I think Amanda has decent power. I think that she has decent striking. She looks to have a decent reach for that weight class. It's going to be very interesting, but I'm going to go with Amanda excuse me. I'm going to go with Amanda Ribas on this one. I think that she's going to win by decision, unanimous decision or majority decision. A lot of these fights could end up as 2 rounds to 1 fights or 3 rounds to 2 fights when it comes down to it. But I'm going to go with Amanda on this one. Paige just has never impressed me when she's fought top-notch competition. And this girl isn't necessarily a top 5 contender, as you can see right there. She's ranked number 14, but she's a very tough number 14. So I'm going to go with Amanda on this one. I'm not necessarily sure what is all in her arsenal, but I'm going to go with Amanda on this one. If Paige can win this one, then that is a great statement that she's improving and that overall she belongs within the top 15. But to be honest with you, Paige was sort of one of those hype jobs that never really lived up to the hype. So we'll see what happens, and that might be a little bit harsh, some people find, but it is what it is. So I'm going to go with Amanda on this one. I would not be surprised if she stopped Paige. I would not be surprised if she knocked her out. I would not be surprised if she ended up submitting her on the ground, because Paige has multiple weak points in her fighting game. But we'll see what happens, and Amanda looks, you know, she looks like the real deal, so we'll see what happens. But I'm going to go with Amanda on this one. I'm going to go by unanimous decision, but we'll see what happens. All right, so next one. Jessica Andrade versus Rose Namajunas. A very interesting fight. Man. So the first time these gals fought, it was, I don't remember even how long ago this was. I believe it was last year, had to have been. But when it came down to it, I remember picking Rose to win the first fight, and I think almost everyone did. Because Jessica Andrade, no offense to her, but she is a little bit one-dimensional as a fighter. She does not move her head around that well. She kind of tries to outpower her opponent by coming forward and hitting them with multiple strikes. She does have decent wrestling, so that's what I will give her. And that is actually what won her the first fight. She actually got Rose overall in the hold, and she picked her up and slammed her on the ground, and Rose hit overall I believe, somewhat the back of her head, if not the back of her head, then, the side of her head, and it knocked her out cold, basically. And Jessica Andrade was the new champion. Rose was completely outstriking her before then, but Rose overall could not hurt her enough to knock her out. And then, of course, Jessica Andrade got a hold of her, and you still got to watch out for that this fight, but, I don't know. Anyway, my prediction for this one, I'm going to go with Rose Namajunas by unanimous decision or by majority decision. Could be even by split decision. Either way, I'm going to go with Rose Namajunas by decision on this one. I think Rose is going to come in more prepared. I think that overall she's going to be a little bit more seasoned, hopefully. Of course, she has not fought in a while, but, what I mean by that is that I think that she's going to come in more prepared for Jessica Andrade. At least, let's hope for Rose's sake. And I do hope Rose wins this rematch because I find her to be the better all-around fighter. I'm not usually a big, fan of one-dimensional fighters, which I do find Jessica Andrade to be a one-dimensional fighter, at least in the striking category. You know what she's going to try to do. She's going to try to come forward. She's going to try to outpower Rose, and then now she's going to try to grab her. She's going to try to slam her on the ground once again. So we'll see what happens. We all know what Jessica Andrade's game plan is. And Rose's game plan is most likely going to be trying to outbox her on the outside, which she can do. Rose does have decent power in her hands. And on top of that, when it comes down to she has very decent technique, she can fight. So I'm going to go with Rose on this one. And then hopefully, if Rose does win this one, we get to see a Namajunas versus Zhang fight. That would be a terrific fight. Fantastic fight. So we'll just have to see what happens, ladies and gents. But I'm going to go with Rose Namajunas on this one by unanimous decision. But this could easily also end up for Jessica Andrade. She is very powerful. Rose maybe is fearful of Jessica Andrade, possibly, because she did knock her out the first time. We'll just have to see what happens, but I'm personally going to go with Rose Namajunas on this one. Should be a very interesting fight. Best of luck to both of them. But I'm going to go with Rose Namajunas by unanimous decision. Okay. Oof. All right. Peter Yan versus Jose Aldo. A Brazilian fighter versus a Russian fighter. Very interesting. Okay. So, first of all, Jose Aldo's last fight, I believe, was against Marlon Moraes. I personally thought Jose Aldo won the Marlon Moraes fight very clearly, but for whatever reason, Marlon Moraes, he always gets very weird decisions, or he's gotten some weird decisions. One against Jose Aldo and also one against John Dodson when he first entered into the UFC, where I did not agree with the decision. So it is what it is. But that's just me telling you that because although Jose Aldo might be ranked at number 11, you could argue that Jose Aldo actually is a top 5 guy. He probably is a top 5 guy. But Peter Yan is nothing to fuck around with. Peter Yan is the real deal. I've seen Peter Yan fight before. The only fault I can really say with Peter Yan that maybe I've seen is that sometimes he looks a little bit too much for the knockout from what I've seen in some of his fights. He's got a lot of power. He's an all-around great athlete. From what I remember, he has great wrestling, or perhaps I could be thinking of someone else. Peter Yan is a great all-around fighter, great all-around athlete. The only thing I would say is that maybe don't look for the knockout completely against Jose Aldo. Maybe try to pin him up against Cage, try to out-wrestle him, do some dirty boxing on the inside, do some, dirty clinch, strikes, all that other stuff. Make it a dirty fight. Make it a, very rough fight, And that's not me saying that I necessarily want him to win this fight, but, that I think that's the way to go if he wants to win this fight. For Jose Aldo, to be honest with you, I'm not really sure how, I'm not saying he can't win this fight. He does have experience on his side. And if Peter Yan, I think, gets too into the point to where he's like, okay, I want to knock this dude out. I want to try to land that one punch to knock him out. Jose will probably embarrass him because you don't want to do that against Jose. Jose is a very accurate counterpuncher. He's a very accurate striker, but he does not look like himself as of late. You got to remember, just not that long ago, he did suffer a devastating knockout to Conor McGregor, and personally, I don't think he's ever recovered from that. Not only that, but he had 2 wars with Max Holloway where it was very close the first couple rounds, but then Max Holloway pretty much beat the shit out of him in the 3rd one. So on top of that, he's had a couple of other very close, rough battles with Jeremy Stevens and Marlon Moraes and, you know, even Alexander Volkanovski. So this is a tough fight. I'm going to go with Peter Yan by unanimous or majority decision or by split decision. I think Peter Yan's going to win this fight. I think Jose Aldo still is a pretty damn decent fighter, but I don't necessarily know if he's the same Jose Aldo, and I don't know if this Jose Aldo can compete with the Peter Yan. Peter Yan is no joke. He has great power, he has great wrestling, he has great striking ability. He just has to fight smart for this one, I think. So we'll see overall what he does. Will experience basically beat this new up-and-comer? I guess we'll have to see. But I'm going to go with Peter Yan on this one. Would not surprise me at all if he did end up knocking Jose Aldo out, because that power, like I said, is no joke. But anyway, so let's continue. A championship caliber fight. All right, Alexander Volkanovski versus Max Holloway. The rematch. All right, this is a very interesting fight. I thought Volkanovski actually beat Max Holloway 5-0 last time I watched this fight, but I've only watched the fight once in full, so I would have to rewatch it to see if those numbers are accurate now. But when it comes down to it, I thought that Volkanovski deserved the fight. I thought Volkanovski won the fight, and I think that he played it perfectly. The thing is about Max Holloway, and I've always said, he is a great fighter, but his skill set is a little bit overrated, especially in the striking category. Max Holloway at times can be very one-dimensional as a striker because he likes to come forward. His head does not really move a great amount off the center line, and when it comes down to it overall, he doesn't really know how to fight backwards all that well. So if you go after his legs early like Volkanovski did, and Volkanovski has very big legs, he's a very great all-around athlete, he's very powerful, not just in his arms, but also in his legs as well, and in his body, period. If you go after his legs early, limit his mobility overall, you know, limit to where he can move in and out overall. And if you consistently strike him and counter him and give him something to be afraid of, like Volkanovski did in the first fight, where it would, like, whenever, you know, Max Holloway would come in, he would either get a leg kick or Volkanovski would back up and then stop and then let Max's momentum run into, you know, some good combinations. I don't see how Max Holloway is going to win this rematch. I think he has a limited skill set. I think he's a great fighter, but I think overall he needs to have a decent reach advantage against certain fighters, not just, you know, not really in terms of arm length, because he really doesn't have that long of a reach for his size. But when it comes down to it, he does need to be taller, lengthier in the legs and all around. Now, he is lengthier and has more of a reach than Volkanovski, but Volkanovski seems to have enough power. He seems to have great enough counter ability, and he seems to overall be, you know, defensively responsible to the point to where I'm not sure if Max Holloway can really beat Volkanovski. I think Volkanovski has the perfect, you know, game plan against Max Holloway. And to be honest, I think if he does the same exact thing as he did in the first fight, just maybe, you know, just overall trying to conserve himself a little bit more. He did wear out a little bit in those final 2 rounds, but I still thought that he won them. So it is what it is. And you got to be very careful with Max Holloway scorecards, because there's been a couple times where I thought the Max Holloway scorecards were a little bit iffy. You know, sometimes where I'm like, you know, that, you know, I thought Max Holloway won, but I didn't think it was that far apart. Or, you know, yeah, that other guy won, but he should have won by more, because 3-2, you know, that fight was not 3-2. In my view, that fight was at least 4 rounds to 1. It probably was 5 rounds to 0. Personally, I would have not gave Max Holloway a round in that fight with Volkanovski, but, you know, maybe that's just me. I don't know. But when it comes down to it, I think Volkanovski has the perfect type of game plan. I was very surprised about how great his movement was. He had great finesse, seemed to have decent stamina, although he does need to conserve himself a little bit more in the latter rounds, because Max Holloway does have great stamina. He was very defensively responsible. I'm going to go with Volkanovski by unanimous decision on this one. I think that he gets it more clear this time. I think overall that he's more prepared this time. I think he's more confident this time, and I just don't know what Max Holloway can really do to change it. I don't really know what he's going to be able to do. So we'll see what happens, but I'm going to go with Volkanovski on this one. We'll see. And that leads us overall to the last and final fight, Kamaru Usman versus Gilbert Burns. Oof, man. Oh, man. Okay. You know, it's so crazy because, you know, just a couple months ago, I would have never bet against anybody after he defeated Colby Covington, who is a very decent fighter and actually very similar to him, which is why I was also wondering, well, maybe Colby can do it. You know, we'll see. I didn't think I was going to pick anyone against Usman after that. But Gilbert Burns, with the tear that he's been on, you know, with him dominating Tyron Woodley and with him knocking out Damian Maia, you know, he's shown me not only does he have very great power, like very, very great power when it comes down to it, he's shown me that he's a great all-around fighter. And one problem I did see with Usman in the Colby Covington fight was that sometimes he is a little bit down the center line a little bit too often when he's striking with opponents. So if he's not able to out-wrestle Gilbert, because Gilbert does seem to be very excellent on the ground. He was able to completely outwork Tyron Woodley. He was able to keep Damian Maia off of him, at least for a little bit. When it came down to it, he seems to be the real deal on the ground in jiu-jitsu and in wrestling. So we'll see what happens. But Kamaru Usman better watch out with this guy. Kamaru Usman probably has the best wrestling in the welterweight division. But when it comes down to it, Gilbert Burns is no joke on the ground, and he's certainly no joke on the strike, you know, on the feet. On the feet, I have to give the advantage to Gilbert Burns. Gilbert Burns has more power than Kamaru Usman. He's, I think, a little bit more swift. He has better movement. You know, sometimes Usman can be a little bit stiff, and sometimes you'll see that with wrestlers. Colby Covington as well has a little bit of that problem. They don't really move their head off the center line as much as they probably should. Gilbert has great power, and if Usman does not be careful, he will get stopped in this fight because Gilbert is none to fuck around with. You know, when it comes down to it over, that power is very, very, very real. If you can hurt Tyron Woodley, if you can also hurt Damian Maia, you have A-class power, and that's what he has. He has A-class power. So Usman, in my view, to beat Gilbert, he probably should try to take him to the ground as soon as possible, because you don't want to try and strike with that man. I don't think Usman has the ability to strike with him. So I think he's going to want to get him in a lot of clinches, and he's going to want to get him on the ground, in my view, in my opinion, that he's going to want to make this a grinding fight, in my view. But we'll see what happens. He may not be able to do that because Gilbert might be very good on the ground, or he might hit him before overall that happens. So we'll see what happens. You know, this is very interesting, and I didn't think I was going to do this, but I'm going to have to pick Gilbert Burns in this fight. And this is my only stoppage that I'm actually predicting. I'm going to predict Gilbert Burns by stoppage within 4 rounds. All right? We'll see what happens. And I'm not very confident in that pick because Kamaru Usman is, you know, a very great fighter. And he's the champion for a reason. But, man, we'll just have to see what happens. But anyway, that's really about it for today. I just thought that I would do that because the fights are next week. UFC 251. The first fight's on Fight Island, I believe. Fantastic fights in general, and stacked card 100%. So I'm going to go with Amanda Hebos. I'm going to go with Rose Namajunas. I'm going to go with Peter Yan. I'm going to go with Alexander Volkanovski. And I'm going to go with Gilbert Burns. And I'm not completely confident in all those picks, but hey, that's what the fight game is about. There's going to be a lot of close fights. So we'll see what happens, man. But that's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.